Well, welcome, Internet, to the very first review in 10-minute record reviews. The very first review is of Led Zeppelin's third album, appropriately enough entitled Led Zeppelin 3. This album comes in the middle of really their golden period, where they release between early '69 and 1975, they release 6 classic albums in about 6.5, 7 years. It toured the US several times. It toured the UK, and in January 1970, they're playing at the Albert Hall, and so the whole '69 is almost non-stop touring, and they make it, as it were. That's the year everything comes together for them. This album they actually wanted to take some time over, and as is pretty well documented, Jimmy and Robert went off to Wales to a little cottage called Bron-Rar Cottage, not Bron E Hour, but Bron-Rar Cottage, and they wrote three of the songs that appear in this album there, a whole bunch of other songs as well, which appeared on later albums. And perhaps because of the setting, or perhaps as a reaction to the very kind of heavy bluesy work that they had been doing, certainly on Led Zeppelin 2, they take the music in a different direction here. So as was noted at the time when it came out, this is widely considered to be Zeppelin's acoustic album, and I think they only did 15 or 16 acoustic songs, even if you include the ones just start acoustically in their whole career. So, you know, a lion's share of their acoustic work is on this album. So it's a fair characterization. Another thing to note about this album is that one of the sort of watersheds in Zeppelin's history, both recording and performing, is what happens to Robert Plant's voice. On a tour of Japan in fall of '72, his high range basically deserts him. That hasn't happened to his voice here yet. He still has his full range, and that is both a good and a bad thing here. It's wonderful in certain songs, but there are times where he makes some over the top decisions in singing and I always think this is Jimmy Page, of course, in addition to being the band's guitarist and basically leader, was also the producer. Having your bandmate as a producer, I always think, makes it awkward when, you know, if Robert's just going for those high notes way too often, and it's hard to say, you know, less is more, right? If you're not an independent sort of objective third party, if you're a bandmate, because then, you know, egos and feelings come into it a lot more. Anyway, I'm just saying this because I know that Robert Plant's voice, you know, gets on some people's nerves. I personally love it. I'm a huge Zepp head, but you know, less could be more. It kicks off with Immigrant Song, which is a barn burner of a song and so atmospheric. You know, written apparently about their trip to Iceland, but wherever you are when you're listening to it, this song takes you to somewhere, you know, to some other place and some other time very effectively. I'm always kind of surprised that there wasn't really much of a solo at all, because this song is over very, very quickly. And given how sort of epic and grand this song is, it's kind of funny that it's over in 2 minutes and 26 seconds. I mean, that's a wild ride, but but you know, there you go. And then you're right into a total change of pace. Friends, which is again a very heavily acoustic number, probably the place on the album where John Paul Jones's talents come to the fore the most, in an album where for the most part he's a background player almost entirely. But here, that string section in Friends tells you that this band has changed a lot, even in the 6 or 7 months since their previous album had come out. So Celebration Day, this is such a heavy-duty song, even though, you know, I mean, there are you know, heavier songs certainly that they recorded. The feeling of the song is just very powerful. It really chugs along. It's a great example of, you know, of his, you know, the guitar army. Although strangely enough, he actually managed to reproduce this quite well live, which is tricky because the guitar parts here are quite intricate. Then you had to Since I've Been Loving You, which is probably in a lot of people's top 10 Zeppelin tunes. John Paul Jones organ weaving in and out. Plant's singing is you know, frankly pretty epic here, and is a couple of fantastic solos by Page here. Really again, typically a little bit sloppy, but so full of emotion and inventiveness. The side closes with Out in the Tiles. This is a song which is essentially a bunch of riff ideas all kind of knitted together, at least three that I can think of, but where the whole is not as great as the sum of the parts. Gallows Pole, opinions divided in this one. I always think it's a really nice piece of psychedelic folk. It's kind of like Janis Joplin Goes to Sherwood Forest. Tangerine, one of the most stunningly beautiful songs they ever did, and strangely a song that they never ever managed to nail live. It's also a very personal song for Robert. It's a kind of, you can see it as a piece with 10 Years Gone from Physical Graffiti as well. So very, very beautiful song, very personal, meaningful song. Then we're into what is probably my favorite song that Zeppelin ever recorded, which is That's the Way. Which was composed on a walk at Bron Rar by Jimmy and Robert, sort of humming it to each other, and then they did a demo when they got back. It is well, certainly it's their best ballad, and it became a mainstay of their acoustic set in the years to follow. And it's got interestingly opaque lyrics. It's about a same-sex friendship. But it's also to a degree about their relationship with their audience, both in the U.S. and the U.K., and some of the wistfulness that came from sort of essentially the rootless life they were living. And if ever the word shimmer applied to music, this is music which shimmers, and I never ever tire of it. Bron Rar Stomp follows immediately thereafter. It is just a fun workout essentially about Robert Plant's dog. Strider was, Robert being at the time fond of Lord of the Rings references. Wonderful, again another sort of upbeat, happy tune, and a concert staple as well. And then we come to the very last song on the album, and just like the first side, this is kind of the low point of the side, although it's even lower, I think, because I would I don't know what you would call Hats Off to Roy Harper. I guess you'd call it psychedelic blues. And I'm not one of these people that rants on and on about Zeppelin's plagiarism and so on. I think that's overdone, and frankly, I think whatever they did with the music they plagiarized, they turned it into something fundamentally different and amazing, and I think that's given too little credit. But here, certainly the lyrics and the vocal melody is lifted pretty much holus bolus from Book of White song, Shake 'Em On Down, which I would actually argue is a, and this is not true, I think, of any of the other songs where Zeppelin either is alleged to or did plagiarize. Book of White song is actually a much better song, a much more listenable song than this one. But Robert is basically singing lifted lyrics to a lifted melody, and with his delivery completely distorted through this oscillation. So it's not unlistenable, but it's easily the low point on the album. What seems almost pathological to me is that they had two other songs at the time which they could have put on this album. They could have put Hey Hey What Can I Do, which to me, substituting that for Hats Off to Roy Harper turns this into probably their best album of all. And there's also there's some other outtakes like Poor Tom, which eventually made it onto the Coda retrospective album, or the Bits and Bobs album they released in the early '80s, and that and that was neglected too in favor of this. So it's a strange decision. Well, if you were only looking at the first 4 songs on each side, this is close to a perfect album. But the half-finished feel of Out in the Tiles and the sort of the psychedelic blues borrowing and the strange production techniques of Hats Off to Roy Harper, and each side on a lower note, and that's why I'm giving this album 4 stars out of 5. In terms of its place in music history, Is it essential, or is it simply significant, or is it really only for fans of the band only? For rock fans, and particularly for hard rock fans, this is an essential album. If you don't have it, if you haven't listened to it, get it and listen to it. Thanks very much for listening.